So before discussing equal protection, let's go back to due process and discuss the requisites for every kind of proceeding. So for due process in administrative proceedings, the following are the requisites. First is that the right to hearing, which includes the right of the party interested or affected to present his own case and submit evidence in support thereof. So the kind of hearing here is not specified as to the format of the hearing or the specifics of how the hearing should be conducted, as long as there is opportunity to the parties interested or affected to present their case. They have the opportunity to be heard, because that is the essence of due process. Second requisite is that not only must the party be given an opportunity to present his case and to adduce evidence tending to establish the rights which he asserts, but the tribunal must consider the evidence presented. Of course, hindi naman pwedeng pinapresent lang siya pero hindi naman makakatulong or hindi naman i-consider yung evidence na pinresent niya. Dapat in making a decision, the tribunal should consider the evidence presented, if meritorious or not. And of course, it has to be done fairly by the tribunal. The decision of the tribunal should be supported by something. So that's the third requisite. It must not be arbitrary. It must be based on evidence. A decision with absolutely nothing to support it is a nullity. Fourth requisite is that the evidence supporting a finding or conclusion must be quote-unquote substantial. This does not include uncorroborated hearsay or rumors. Fifth requisite, the decision must be rendered on the evidence presented at the hearing, or at least contained in the record or disclosed to the parties affected. Only by confining the administrative tribunal to the evidence disclosed to the parties can the latter be protected in the right to know and meet the case against them. Sixth requisite, the body must act on its or his own independent consideration of the law and facts of the controversy, and not simply accept the views of a subordinate in arriving at the decision. And the last requisite is that the body or the tribunal must render its decision in such manner that the parties to the proceeding can know the various issues involved and the reasons for the decision rendered. The constitutional requirement that the judgment be in writing and promulgated is not applicable to administrative decisions, and the ang tibay case is used as a basis for stating that quasi-judicial tribunals should render its decision in such a manner that the parties to the proceeding know the various issues involved and the reasons for the decision. Now, for labor cases, the following are the requisites. Consists of 2 notices. The first notice is that the employer must furnish the employee with 2 written notices before the termination of employment can be effected. The first is to apprise the employee of the particular acts or omissions for which his dismissal is sought, so hindi pwedeng baseless or groundless. And the second notice is the employer informs the employee of the decision to dismiss him. Hearing is not a requirement and will not render the dismissal void. But usually, for labor cases, if it is tried by the employer, then usually yung practice sa industry is that the employer, through the HR, sends a notice to explain, or yung NTE. And then the subject employee will have to explain in writing why, kung ano yung allegations sa kanila sa NTE, violations ng code of conduct nila. And then from there could be a decision right away as long as mo complying to notices, or some companies, they have hearings as well, depending on the gravity of the offense. So it depends, but the requisite, the simplest requisites, or the most basic requisites are these 2 notices when it comes to labor cases. Now, if unsatisfied naman yung employee sa decision or sa naging hearing ng case niya, then can go to the Department of Labor. Then there's the DOLE, there's a labor arbiter, there's the NLRC, and all that. Due process in academic disciplinary proceedings, so sa schools or universities, the following are the requisites. First is that the students must be informed in writing of the nature and cause of any accusation against them. Second, they shall have the right to answer the charges against them with the assistance of counsel if desired. Third, they shall be informed of the evidence against them. Third, informed of the evidence against them. Fourth, they shall have the right to adduce evidence in their own behalf. And lastly, the evidence must be duly considered by the investigating committee or official designated by the school authorities to hear and decide the case. So the proceedings may be summary, wala ring required na format or how the hearing should be conducted. There's no need for cross-examination. It's not an essential part of the investigation or hearing. The required proof in a student disciplinary action is substantial evidence. What is crucial is that official action must meet minimum standards of fairness to the individual, which generally encompass the right of adequate notice and a meaningful opportunity to be heard. So now let's talk about equal protection of the laws, because Section 1 of the Bill of Rights state, again, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. So equal protection, what is equal protection? Equal protection means that all persons or things similarly situated must be similarly treated both as to rights conferred and responsibilities imposed. It covers both natural and juridical persons. However, the Equal Protection Clause extends to artificial persons only insofar as their property is concerned, of course. When you say artificial persons, these are juridical persons like corporations, partnerships, entities that are not human beings. So when you say equal protection, it doesn't mean that everyone should be treated equally. When you say equally, like equality talaga, na same, parehas ng treatment. It's more of, not equality, but, what's the term? Equitable, I guess, or depende. Same ang treatment kapag same kayo ng classification. Pero kung iba kayo ng classification, of course, magkaiba yung treatment sa inyo. Because it's impossible to attain equality, especially if persons are not in the same situation. You have to consider that they should be equally treated only if they undergo the same circumstances. Otherwise, it would also result to injustice if it's just plain equality. So requisites for valid classification, because again, equal protection requires, of course, a valid classification first. You classify the persons if they are similarly situated, and then you make sure that if they are of the same classification, they are treated the same. Equal yung treatment if similarly situated or same sila na classification. But if magkaiba ng classification, that's okay. Like for example, senior citizens, they enjoy 20% discount. They are a certain classification. So one cannot say that they are also entitled to the discount, the senior citizens discount, if they're not senior citizens. So is there inequality by giving senior citizens discount? So it's not considered as there is no violation in the Equal Protection Clause just because the government is giving senior citizens discount, because the senior citizens are one classification, and as there is only a violation of equal protection if there is a senior citizen, like over 65 years old, that does not enjoy the discount. So as long as you're a senior citizen, you're entitled to the discount. If you're a senior citizen and you're deprived of enjoyment of that discount, then there is a violation of equal protection. Otherwise, there is no violation. So very important that there is valid classification. So when is there valid classification? The following are the requisites for valid classification. First, it must rest on substantial distinctions or must make for real differences. So there's actual difference. Again, in the example of senior citizens, substantial distinction is very clear that there's a real difference between a senior citizen and someone who is not. If you're a senior citizen, you're 65 years or older. If you're younger than 65 years old, then you are not considered a senior citizen. So that's a substantial distinction. The basis is the age of the person. Second is that it must be germane to the purpose of the law. When you say germane, it must be related to the purpose of the law. So what is the purpose of the senior citizen discount? Of course, it's to give a privilege to senior citizens who have been taxpayers for a very long time already, considering that they have, when you become older, of course, your body tends to be weaker, and it's not the case. Of course, there are strong senior citizens. It's not just the base, but the point is the elderly needs to be cared for more than the younger ones or the younger portion of the population, which is presumed to be more able-bodied because they're younger, of course. So it's also kind of a reward because they have been working, they have been paying their taxes for a long time already. So it's a way to give back to them. That's why they have discounts. Usually, the purpose of the law is stated in the law itself. So if we look at the, okay, let's try looking for that one. Okay, we have RA number 9994. Okay, so it states here the purpose. Kasi what I said kanina, I just assumed na yun yung purpose. But if you look at the law itself, particularly here in our example, RA number 9994, which is the Expanded Senior Citizens Act, it's to recognize the rights of senior citizens to take their proper place in society, to give full support to the improvement of the total being of the elderly, to motivate and encourage senior citizens to contribute to nation building, to encourage families and communities they live with to reaffirm with the valued Filipino tradition of caring for the senior citizens, comprehensive healthcare and rehabilitation system for disabled senior citizens, and for them to attain a more meaningful and productive aging, and to recognize the important role of the private sector in the improvement of the welfare of the senior citizens. So, basically, yung sinabi ka din, and more. So, that is considered as a valid classification, an example of a valid classification. Third requisite is that it must not be limited to existing conditions only, meaning that if the present conditions change, the classification still stands. There's a sense of permanence in the classification, and it must equally apply to all members of the same class. Other examples of valid classification are Filipino female domestics working abroad. They are a class by themselves because of the special risks to which their class was exposed. This is based on jurisprudence. Land-based versus sea-based Filipino overseas workers, so there is a dissimilarity as to work environment. That's why they are classified differently. There's a difference in their work environment, their safety, the danger to life and limb, and accessibility to social, civil, and spiritual activities. The Office of the Ombudsman, allowing the Ombudsman to start an investigation based on an anonymous letter. Okay, so this is a special way of starting an investigation. the letter can be anonymous, and that's okay. It does not violate equal protection clause because the office of the ombudsman is different from other investigatory and prosecutory agencies of government. Usually sa other prosecutory agencies of the government, bawal yung anonymous letters to start a case. While you file a case and all that, there's a specific process laid out in the rules of court, and the accused, for example, has the right to know who initiated the case against him. It's different in the office of the ombudsman because those subject to its jurisdiction are public officials who, through official pressure and influence, can quash, delay, or dismiss investigations against them. So, the office of the ombudsman, they hear cases involving high-profile individuals, politicians. So, the circumstance is different. It's pasok siya dun sa valid classification. Rational basis test. The classification should bear a reasonable relation to the government's purpose or legitimate state interest. Strict scrutiny test applies to legislative classifications which impermissibly interfere with the exercise of a fundamental right or operates to the peculiar disadvantage of a suspect class. Such classifications are presumed unconstitutional, and the government has the burden to prove that the classification is necessary to achieve a compelling state interest and that it is the least restrictive means to protect such interest. Intermediate scrutiny test. Under the intermediate scrutiny test, the government must show that the challenged classification serves important governmental objectives and must be substantially related to the achievement of those objectives. So if you go back to the requisites for valid classification, pasok to sa it must be germane to the purpose of the law. And of course, dapat valid yung purpose of the law, why there is a need for classification. Suspect classes refers to classification that violates a fundamental right or prejudices a person accorded special protection by the Constitution. Suspect classes may therefore include an income-based classification. So same with taxes. It's not total equality. Progressive kasing taxation. So if you're similarly situated, like for example, minimum wage earners, they're treated the same. The higher the income, if you're on that certain income bracket, you're treated the same. If you're a business, you're treated the same with other businesses. So hindi same yung treatment din sa business sa individual. Hindi rin same yung treatment sa aliens sa citizens mismo. So there's a valid classification and there's equal protection of the laws. So what else for equal protection? Guess hanggang doon lang yung notes ko for equal protection. Let's see. Political law. Yeah. So, yun naman importante. And the standards of judicial review, we already discussed. Rational basis, again, reasonable relation of the classification to the government's purpose, which must be a legitimate purpose. Strict scrutiny test, again, mga test to determine if na-violate yung equal protection or hindi. Strict scrutiny test if nagva-violate yung classification sa rights, sa fundamental rights ng isang person. or works to the disadvantage of a certain class. So that's strict scrutiny. Intermediate scrutiny, the government must show that the classification serves important governmental objectives and that the classification is necessary to achieve those objectives. Pretty much parang rational basis test din. But the difference sa rational basis and intermediate scrutiny is that reasonable lang sa rational basis, there must be a reason. Sa intermediate scrutiny is that it's absolutely important na ganyan yung classification. You kind of have to weigh why. So it may serve some disadvantage, but there is a public interest that is very important and that should be achieved. And it can be achieved if there is that law that requires that certain classification. Again, yung sa strict scrutiny naman is how much of a disadvantage is it really worth it? Parang ganon. So, you compare the interest, the individual's interest with the state interest, and you kind of weigh it. Parang balancing of interest din in a way. But the point of strict scrutiny is that even if you implement this valid classification, it must be in a way that it is least restrictive or least damaging. So for the next video, ano naman? Section 3, Privacy of Communication. Yes. Here are my notes. Talk about arrests. Oh, section 2 pa pala. Kasi section 1 pa lang to. Due process, equal protection, that's section 1. Section 2 is about arrests, searches, and seizures. So that's the next topic. Okay.